Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often.
We are the only Deathworlders on this bloody planet! How cool is that?
Hussar said as he reached out, arms spreading wide like welcoming wings to draw in both his sister on the left and his mate on the right, pulling them closer. The trio of furred Lusarians strode confidently down the gleaming thoroughfare of Neuter, the administrative heart of the Federation. The cityscape around them was a modern blend of architectural styles, soaring metallic structures and sweeping organic structures bathed in the light of the planet's single sun, casting strangely shaped shadows across the simple stone beneath their feet. But more fascinating than the buildings was the crowd's reaction to their presence. The sea of beings parted before them like water breaking against the bow of a ship. Herbivorous species scuttled away with wide, frightened eyes, their slender limbs moving with the nervous energy of prey. Even the carnivorous non-Deathworlders gave the Lusarians a wide berth, though their gazes held a mixture of respect and caution rather than outright fear. The street opened up as if by some unspoken command, creating a channel through which the three Trodarians could walk unimpeded. Hussar couldn't help the satisfied rumble that rose from his chest. This was the natural order of things, after all. Those at the top of the food chain, true apex predators like themselves, deserved the respect and deference of lesser species. It was the way of the universe, a truth as fundamental as gravity. In the center of their small group, Hussar walked with the confident swagger of one who knew his place in the cosmos. At 6.5 feet tall, he wasn't the largest male his species could produce, but his frame carried the unmistakable hallmarks of evolution on a death world. His body, a figure shaped to survival on Trodaria, had been forged by the planet's crushing gravity, nearly twice that of standard Federation worlds. Thick, dark fur covered his muscular frame, the midnight black broken only by distinctive white spots that scattered across his back and shoulders like stars against the void. His powerful legs carried him with a grace that belied his mass, and beneath the fur of his hands, retractable claws waited, weapons that could slice through the skins of all kinds of beings known to the Federation. Perhaps most impressive of all was his immune system, a biological marvel that allowed him and his kind to walk freely without medication or protective gear on worlds that would send most species into quarantine protocols. As they reached an intersection, Hussar felt his sister's body suddenly go rigid beside him. An abrupt, solid thud followed, and she came to a complete stop.
Sorry, little one,
Hagara said softly to the small green biped who had collided with her and now recoiled on the ground, looking up at her with trembling limbs and wide, glistening eyes. Like all Trodarians, Hagara shed the distinctive black fur with white spotting, though she stood slightly shorter than Hussar, at just over 6 feet. Her frame was less bulky than his, but no less deadly. Trodarian females were known throughout the Federation for their superior agility and their exceptionally sharp claws and teeth. Her snout was shorter than a male's, her pink nose more delicate, and her blue eyes, a trait unique to her lineage, shone with intelligence as she extended a 5-fingered hand toward the frightened alien. The creature's trembling intensified at the sight of Hagara's extended hand. When her retractable claws instinctively slid partially from their sheaths, a reflexive response to the potential need for quick movement, the small alien let out a terrified squeak and scrambled backward before turning to flee, leaving a small puddle where it had fallen.
You're always too nice with the herbivores, Hagara. Don't you know they prefer to be ignored?
She stooped down gracefully, touching the tip of her finger to the small puddle left behind and bringing it to her sensitive nose.
The Floxium has pissed itself,
she announced with a dismissive flick of her ears.
Typical response. Their kind never develop proper flight responses. Just freeze and empty their bladders. Pathetic survival strategy.
Ysara's features were remarkably similar to Hagara's. The same species traits were evident, but where Hagara's fur bore only scattered white spots, Ysara's coat was liberally dappled, giving her a more striking appearance. Her form was more athletic, honed by what Husar knew to be years of real combat. The faint scars visible through her fur around her shoulders and forearms, badges of honor from battles long past, had been what first attracted Husar to her, a warrior spirit in a form both deadly and beautiful. Husar didn't miss the slight curl of Hagara's lip as she regarded Ysara, nor the subtle narrowing of Ysara's eyes in return. The tension between his sister and his mate was a constant undercurrent, one he'd grown adept at navigating. Before the moment could crystallize into something more uncomfortable, he smoothly inserted himself between them. "Come on, let's forget these weak creatures," he said with deliberate brightness. "We have only one more day in the Federation administrative world before our transport leaves. We should make the most of it." He draped his arms around their shoulders again, turning them away from the scene of the Phloxians' embarrassment. "Where shall we go? What would please my two favorite females in the galaxy this evening?" His diversion worked as intended. The tension dissolved as both females considered the possibilities that Neuter offered.
I heard there's a place that serves authentic Gretharian blood beetles,
Ysara said, her pupils dilating at the thought of the rare delicacy.
"Supposedly imported directly from the hunting preserves." "Blood beetles?"
Hagara's nose wrinkled in distaste.
"Too crunchy, and the fluid inside is barely worth the effort of cracking the carapace. What about the Voldavian meat hall everyone's talking about? They age their cuts for 100 standard days in volcanic chambers." "Too soft,"
Ysara countered.
"Meat should have resistance when you bite into it. Reminds you that you've earned your meal."
The debate continued until Husar noticed both females kept circling back to one common desire: fermented drinks. Something strong enough to affect a Trodarian metabolism, something exotic. "If it's unique fermented beverages you're after," Husar interjected with a knowing grin, "there is only one place on Neuter worth your time." He paused dramatically. "The Everything Tavern." Both females turned to him with interest. "I used to be a regular there a few cycles back when I was just an assistant ambassador," he continued. "Before Ysara were in my life. It's an experience unlike any other in the Federation."
"What kind of experience?"
Hagara asked, intrigued. "The Everything Tavern lives up to its name," Husar explained as they walked, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "The proprietor, a Xantillian with connections across 17 sectors, claims to stock at least one beverage from every spacefaring species in the galaxy. Some say even a few from pre-spaceflight civilizations, though that would violate at least 6 Federation regulations."
"Have you tried them all?"
Ysara asked, a competitive gleam in her eye. "Stars no," Husar laughed. "Even a Trodarian liver has its limits. But I did once witness a Trevexian diplomat attempt to drink something called Sornisian milk. The poor fool's belly started changing colors before he even finished the glass."
"What was your favorite?"
Hagara inquired, her blue eyes fixed on him. "There was this one drink the Krylar female behind the bar recommended." Husar began, then abruptly stopped as he felt Ysara's claws press ever so slightly into his arm.
"Krylar female?"
Ysara's voice was deceptively casual, but her scent had shifted to something sharper.
"You never mentioned a Krylar before."
"Did I say female? I meant the bartender. The Krylar bartender. Barely knew her." Husar backpedaled quickly. "She just suggested a good drink. That's all. Professional relationship. Very professional. Hagara's amused purr did nothing to help this situation, as Ysara's gaze bore into him.
How professional?
Ysara pressed.
About as professional as one can be while still remembering their species several cycles later,
Hagara murmured, earning a glare from both her brother and his mate. The point is, Husar said loudly, the Everything Tavern has the best selection of drinks on the planet, and the clientele is, weird. He emphasized the last word meaningfully, hoping to redirect their attention. It worked. Both females latched onto the new topic as they made their way through Neuter's gradually darkening streets. The administrative district gave way to areas with less official-looking buildings, constructions that seemed to have grown organically rather than being planned, streets that curved instead of following grid patterns. The journey took them through neighborhoods of increasingly varied species composition. They passed clusters of methane breathers huddled around atmospheric vents, flotillas of aquatic beings suspended in hovering water tanks, and even a pair of energy beings contained in specially designed mobile units that seemed to glow from inside. Finally, they turned onto a street that seemed to exist in defiance of Federation architectural standards. And there, nestled between a Javorian crystal exchange and what appeared to be a Quilarian meditation center, stood the Everything Tavern. The entrance was deceptively simple, an archway of some dark metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Above it hung a sign composed of shifting holographic script that cycled through the words Everything Tavern in hundreds of languages. As they approached, Husar felt a familiar anticipation building in his chest. "Ready?" he asked his companions with a grin that displayed his impressive canines. They crossed the threshold together, and the sounds and scents of the establishment washed over them, a mixture of alien music overlaid with dozens of languages. The mingled aromas of food and drink from across the galaxy, some appetizing, others distinctly not. The lighting was dim by Federation standards, but perfect for Trodarian eyes, revealing a space far larger than the exterior suggested. Species from across known space clustered around tables of various heights and designs. Some patrons floated in anti-gravity bubbles, others sprawled across heating platforms, and still others perched on structures that seemed designed specifically for their unique physiologies. Behind a long bar of polished asteroid stone, multiple bartenders of different species worked in the chaos, preparing drinks that steamed, glowed, levitated, or occasionally seemed to violate the laws of physics, all complex tricks, of course. As the three Trodarians stood framed in the doorway, several patrons glanced their way. There was the usual widening of eyes, subtle shifting of positions, the instinctive reaction to predator species, but something was different here. It wasn't until his gaze fell on a table in the far corner that he understood. There, surrounded by empty tables in a place where one had to wait in line for a seat, sat something he had never expected to encounter. Another group that seemed to repel the crowd.
"What are those things on the other side of the tavern?"
Hagara asked, her blue eyes narrowing as she analyzed the distant group. Husar followed her gaze, observing them in more detail. 3 bipedal creatures occupied a corner table, their postures relaxed yet somehow alert. Unlike the delicate frames of most Federation species, these creatures were solid, dense with what appeared to be muscle beneath their hairless skin. They stood taller than most species he'd encountered, perhaps matching or even exceeding Trodarian height. Their limbs were thick, particularly around what must be load-bearing joints. Most striking was their apparent lack of natural weapons. No visible claws, no fangs that he could discern, yet they carried themselves with the unmistakable confidence of predators. What truly caught Husar's attention was their complete disregard for the tavern's other patrons. They conversed among themselves, laughing loudly, gesturing with powerful limbs, utterly unconcerned by the empty tables surrounding them. That kind of certainty spoke volumes about their confidence in their own strength. No creature showed such disregard for potential threats unless they were absolutely certain of their ability to handle whatever came their way. Hussar noticed the tavern's herbivorous patrons dividing their anxious glances between the Trodarians and these unknown creatures. Their thoughts crossed the interspecies barrier with such clarity that Hussar could practically read their minds. The terrified anticipation that the two apex groups might clash, turning the tavern into a bloodbath that would consume any smaller species caught in the crossfire.
3 of them and 3 of us,
Ysara observed, her pupils dilating with interest.
It's like the universe is asking for a bar fight.
Hussar knew his mate well enough to recognize that predatory gleam in her eyes. Unlike Hagara, who always preferred talking, Ysara wouldn't hesitate to assert dominance through physical means. She had, after all, earned her scars in genuine combat.
Let's not forget this is our last day here, Hussar cautioned, and I'm more in the mood to enjoy our evening than prove anything. We know what we are. I agree, Hagara said. We've nothing to prove. Come on, Ysara purred, running a claw lightly across Hussar's chest. Even the prey species want to see some action. I can smell the anticipation in the air.
She leaned closer, her whisper a challenge.
Or are you afraid?
Hussar's ear flicked in irritation.
There are better ways to test if those creatures are the real deal or not, he said, thinking quickly. Let's take a table on the opposite side of the tavern and count how many empty seats the prey species leave around us compared to them. That would show who they truly fear more. A perfect competition without needless violence.
Ysara didn't seem thrilled by the idea, but after exchanging glances with Hagara, she shrugged her agreement.
Fine, though I still think my way would have been more fun.
They approached a staff member, a thin-limbed Volarian with trembling antennae, to request a table. The Volarian's 4 eyes darted nervously between the Trodarians and the other group of predators across the tavern.
I'm sorry, but perhaps tonight isn't the best night for your visit,
the server suggested delicately.
We're quite crowded, and
you have plenty of empty tables, Hussar pointed out, his patience wearing thin.
Yes, but in the interest of all our patrons' comfort, perhaps another establishment might.
Hussar felt his control slipping. His claws extended reflexively as his arm began to rise. Before he could make contact with the insolent creature, a familiar voice cut through his anger.
Hussar! It's been cycles.
He turned to see a Krylar approaching them, her scaled skin familiar. She was exactly as he remembered, lithe, composed, and completely unintimidated by his presence.
Vreen,
he acknowledged, retracting his claws.
He's an old client.
Vreen told the server.
I'll handle this. We can seat them on the opposite side from the humans.
Humans? Hussar repeated, the unfamiliar word catching his attention.
Yes, the Deathworlders at the corner table.
Vreen explained casually.
They're relatively new to the Federation, rather like yourselves, actually.
Hussar felt a jolt of surprise. Another Deathworld species? The concept was so novel he needed a moment to process it. Deathworlders were, by definition, rare. The statistical likelihood of multiple sentient species evolving on planets that would kill most Federation members was astronomically low.
We don't want trouble, he assured Vreen. Just a chance to see which side of the tavern empties faster once we're seated. No violence, I promise. It's just a matter of pride.
He glanced toward the humans.
I suspect they would understand such a competition, even if others don't.
Vreen considered him for a moment, then sighed.
Fine, but I'm holding you personally responsible if anything happens.
The rest of the staff complied, though not without grumbling that they would lose money on all the empty tables. Hussar and his companions took their seats, deliberately not ordering anything yet, simply watching the surrounding tables to see how quickly they would empty. Minutes passed as the fear response spread among the herbivorous species. One by one, they made awkward excuses and relocated to safer areas of the tavern. Hussar counted carefully, feeling a surge of confidence as the tables around them cleared, until he looked across the tavern and realized the worst possible scenario was unfolding. 5 tables stood empty around the Trodarians, and exactly 5 tables had emptied around the humans.
"This is unacceptable," Ysara hissed. "It should be clear who the strongest species is." "Perhaps it's a draw,"
Hagara suggested, always the pragmatist.
"Why not just introduce ourselves? I'm curious about these humans." "A draw?" Ysara scoffed. "There's no such thing when it comes to hierarchy. We need to settle this."
Hussar said nothing, his pride slightly wounded. Throughout his diplomatic career, he had grown accustomed to being the unquestioned apex being in any room. The notion of equals, especially unknown equals, disturbed his sense of the natural order. He found himself staring at the human group, noting they seemed to consist of 2 males and 1 female, if he was interpreting their dimorphism correctly. One of the males, the largest of the 3, noticed his stare. Rather than looking away as any sensible being would, the human held his gaze. A staring competition, then. Hussar refused to blink, to show any sign of submission, but the human made no aggressive move. Instead, he simply raised his massive mug, maintained eye contact, and drained the entire contents in a few seconds. Then, with what could only be described as audacity, he smiled, showing flat, unimpressive teeth, and set the empty mug on the table with a deliberate thud. Something snapped in Hussar. He rose to his feet, fur bristling along his spine. "Server!" he called, loud enough for his voice to carry across the entire tavern. "We'll have whatever they're having." He pointed directly at the humans. "And we want twice as much." The staff exchanged worried glances as a wave of tension passed through the tavern. Ysara's eyes lit up, excited at Hussar's boldness, making him suspect she enjoyed the competition more than she cared about his old friendship with Vreen. Meanwhile, Hagara groaned, massaging her temples. "Stars above, must we do this?" she muttered. "My brood of a brother and his fight-obsessed mate. I was looking forward to a pleasant evening." The tavern staff hurried to comply, though their concern was evident in their jerky movements and nervous glances. Across the room, the humans had clearly noticed the challenge. The large male who had initiated the exchange spoke to his companions, and they flagged down their own server, pointing to their mugs and then toward the Trodarian's table. The message was unmistakable. Match our order and leave the empty mugs on the table for all to see. When the drinks arrived, Hussar was surprised to find the liquid inside was a deep amber color with a thick head of foam. The scent was complex, earthy with hints of something sweet and a strong undertone of fermentation. The server slid the massive mugs in front of each of them, with evident fear. "What is this?" Hagara asked, her curiosity overcoming her earlier reluctance. "The humans call it beer," the server replied. "Specifically, this is one of their strongest varieties. We don't usually serve it to non-humans." Hagara, despite her initial hesitation, was the first to lift her mug. She took a cautious sip, then her eyes widened in surprise. "This is remarkable!" Hussar and Ysara followed suit. The flavor exploded across Hussar's palate. Rich, complex, with a pleasant bitterness that balanced the sweetness. Before he realized it, he had drained half his mug in continuous gulps. The liquid warmed his throat and spread a pleasant heat through his core.
"Those humans may be our rivals,"
Ysara whispered in Hussar's ear.
"but they have excellent taste in beverages."
Hussar could only nod in agreement as he locked eyes once more with the human male across the tavern. He deliberately drained his mug, mimicking the human's earlier display but completing the act even faster. Then he returned the smile, adding a slight flash of fang for emphasis. Around them, Hussar noticed the herbivorous species had begun to whisper among themselves. Strangely, they didn't seem to be cowering in fear anymore. Instead, they watched with a different kind of intensity, anticipation, perhaps even excitement. As the competition continued, the effects of the human beverage became increasingly apparent. Ysara grew louder, her normally precise movements becoming more expansive as she casually extended her claws when touching Hussar's arm. She called out challenges across the tavern that the humans couldn't possibly understand, though they seemed to be responding in kind with phrases like, "The drunk catwoman better pace herself." Hagara, meanwhile, had settled into a state of contented bliss, swaying slightly to music only she seemed to hear as she savored each mouthful of the potent drink. Hussar considered slowing down, maintaining his reason when his companions clearly weren't, but something caught his eye. A line of herbivores and non-Deathworlders forming near the counter. They weren't ordering drinks. They were clustered around a small holographic display where numbers scrolled next to images of both the Trodarians and the humans. His sharp vision focused on the board, understanding dawning as he realized what was happening. The herbivores were betting on the competition. They had turned the drinking contest into a spectacle, wagering on which group would remain standing longer. The exact values didn't matter to Hussar, nor did the fact that the establishment had found a way to profit from their pride. What eliminated any thought of moderation was the realization that the number of bets placed on the humans was slightly higher than those placed on his species. "More!" he commanded, slamming his empty mug on the table. "Another round!" The drinking continued, with Hussar fully committed now. Mug after massive mug arrived and was quickly emptied. The taste, which had been novel and pleasant at first, barely registered now as the competition consumed his focus. It wasn't until he reached for what must have been his 6th or 7th mug that Hussar noticed something was wrong. Ysara was barely keeping herself from falling face first onto the table, her eyelids drooping between forced blinks. Hagara wasn't much better, her head lolling to one side as she muttered something about the fascinating molecular structure of fermented grain. Hussar himself felt far from his best. When he tried to stand, the tavern tilted alarmingly, forcing him to grip the table for support. Looking toward the human group, he saw that while they too showed signs of intoxication, flushed skin, louder voices, less coordinated movements, they were faring better than the Trodarians. The realization settled over him with heavy finality. They had lost. These humans, whatever they were, had proven themselves the superior Deathworlders, just in this particular contest, of course. He leaned forward, steadying himself against the table. I think we may have met our match this time, he admitted to Ysara and Hagara. The females exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes despite their inebriated state. To Hussar's surprise, Ysara didn't erupt in anger or demand a different type of context.
"At least we had fun,"
she slurred, her head drooping onto his shoulder.
"Good drinks. Very good drinks."
Hagara, meanwhile, had brightened considerably.
"Can we talk to them now, the humans? I have so many questions about their planet."
Before Hussar could respond, a commotion erupted nearby. A thin-limbed Javorian approached their table, its normally placid features contorted with uncharacteristic anger. Without warning, it flung its drink directly into Hussar's face.
"Stupid Losarians!"
the herbivore shouted, loud enough for the entire tavern to hear.
"You made me lose a fortune!"
It turned to address the stunned crowd.
"So much for the so-called strongest species in the galaxy."
The act was so unexpected, so contrary to the natural order of things, that Hussar could only blink in shock as the liquid dripped from his fur. Before he could gather his thoughts, another drink came flying through the air, this one striking Ysara squarely in the face. She stared at the thrower, a small Phloxian, with utter disbelief. A third projectile splashed across their table as an emboldened Voldavian called out,
"The Losarians are weak now. Time for payback!"
Suddenly, as if a dam had broken, drinks began raining down on them from all directions. Bottles and glasses followed, some shattering against the table or floor. Husar tried to shield Ysara with his body, but it was useless. They were surrounded. "What is wrong with you?" he roared, his diplomatic calm tone forgotten in the face of such madness. "Have you all lost your minds? This herd behavior is exactly why herbivores will never—" His words only seemed to intensify the assault. Now, a small Quillarian attempted to heft a chair toward them, though its spindly limbs could barely lift the furniture. Husar grabbed Ysara and tried to reach Hagara, intending to form a defensive triangle as they retreated towards the exit. But the way was blocked by a surging mass of herbivores, all emboldened by the Trodarians' weakened state and acting with the mindless courage of a herd infected by collective hysteria after losing money. This was about to become the worst day of their lives, a humiliating beating at the hands of many species they had always considered beneath them, when suddenly movement caught Husar's eye from across the tavern. The three humans had risen unsteadily from their seats. Despite their obvious intoxication, they moved together. The largest male stepped forward and, without hesitation, drove his fist into the face of the nearest aggressor, a Javorian who had been about to launch another bottle at the Trodarians. The herbivore went down instantly, green ichor spurting from what passed for its nose. In seconds, the humans had waded into the fray, striking indiscriminately at the smaller species who had been attacking the Trodarians. Those who had bet on the humans were now shouting protests, outraged that their champions were defending the losing side rather than accepting their victory. Ysara's fighting instinct overcame her intoxication. She grabbed a chair, hefting it with alarming ease despite her condition.
"This is how it's done,"
she roared, bringing the furniture down on a cluster of would-be attackers. Hagara, surprising Husar with her sudden focus, darted through the chaos toward one of the humans, the female, who was being swarmed by 3 Voldavians. With unexpected grace, Hagara extracted the human from the pile, her claws making short work of the herbivore's clothing and superficial layers of skin. Husar found himself moving without conscious decision. He surged forward, pushing through the crowd until he reached the side of the large human male who had started the drinking competition. They found themselves back to back as the tavern staff joined the fray, attempting to restore order but only adding to the chaos.
"Stupid herbivores!"
Husar growled as he swatted away a particularly brave Floxian.
"No concept of proper challenge and resolution."
To his surprise, the human let out a barking laugh.
"Right? Always play by the rules until they lose. Then suddenly, it's mob mentality."
His accent was strange but understandable.
"I'm Lucas, by the way. Figured we should know each other's names if we're fighting together."
"Husar," he replied, ducking as a bottle sailed over their heads.
"Diplomatic attaché, though I might be recalled after this."
"Worth it," Lucas grunted, landing a solid punch on a charging Dravexian.
"Been too long since a good bar fight."
Together, they fought their way through the crowd, covering each other's blind spots with the instinctive coordination of natural predators. The herbivores were numerous, but lacked the proper instincts for effective combat. Their movements predictable, their attacks uncoordinated despite their advantage in numbers. As the fight progressed, only a few larger aggressors remained standing. Among them were 2 massive Grozaks, 4-armed plant-eaters, certainly, but evolved with thick hides and considerable mass that made them dangerous regardless of diet. One faced Husar and Lucas, while the other confronted the females and the other humans across the wrecked tavern.
"Together?"
Lucas suggested, eyeing the approaching Grozaks. Husar nodded, feeling an unexpected kinship with this alien Deathworlder.
"Why not?"
They moved at the same time, Lucas going low while Husar went high, one distracting while the other struck softer points. The Grozaks fought valiantly, but lacked the combat instincts that came naturally to species evolved as hunters. Within minutes, it toppled, joining the unconscious bodies littering the tavern floor. Across the room, Hussar saw that the females, both Trodarian and human, had dispatched their opponent with similar ease. As the dust settled, the 6 Deathworlders converged in the center of the destroyed tavern. They stood among overturned tables, shattered glass, and unconscious herbivores, regarding each other. An awkward silence fell before the human female extended her hand, a universal gesture of peaceful intent.
"I'm Samantha," she said. "This is Lucas, my partner, and our friend, Igor. It's his birthday, which is why we came here to celebrate."
"Birthday?" Hagara inquired, her curiosity resurfacing despite her disheveled appearance. "Anniversary of birth," Igor explained. He was shorter than Lucas, but more densely built, with facial hair that reminded Hussar of a Zentilian's sensory bristles. "Annual celebration. Involves drinking, in my case lots of it." The Trodarians introduced themselves in turn, Hussar explaining they had nothing appropriate for a birth celebration, after having the concept explained. "I think you gave him the perfect gift," Lucas said, gesturing to the tavern around them. "His first bar fight." In the distance, the distinctive wail of Federation security drones could be heard approaching. The 6 exchanged glances. "I think we should continue this conversation elsewhere," Hussar suggested.
"Agreed," Samantha said. "We know a place."
As they hurried out of the tavern, supporting each other's still unsteady steps, Hussar learned that the humans were indeed newcomers to the Federation, the first species from their sector to be granted membership. Like the Trodarians, they had evolved on a high-gravity world with environmental conditions that would kill most Federation species instantly. "Our planet's bacteria alone would devastate most of these species," Lucas explained as they navigated Neuter's night streets. "We need no protection here, but they need it from us." Hussar nodded in understanding. "The same is true for us. I had thought we were unique in this regard." "Not anymore," Igor said, walking slightly behind with Hagara. The 2 of them engaged in enthusiastic comparison of their homeworld's respective gravity measurements. The 6 of them cut through Neuter's night crowds like a blade. The sea of beings parted before them, creating a channel wider than Hussar had ever experienced. The respect and fear in the eyes of the passing herbivores was unmistakable as they gazed upon the 2 species of allied Deathworlders. As they rounded a corner, Hussar caught a glimpse of their reflection in a polished building surface. 6 apex predators, bloodied but unbowed, moving with the confidence of those who had nothing to fear from the universe. Perhaps, Hussar thought as he watched Hagara's animated conversation with Igor, their species could get along better than either had managed with the rest of the Federation. After all, only another Deathworlder could truly understand what it meant to be the monster that haunted other species' nightmares, and the responsibility that came with such power. "You know," he said to Samantha, "I believe this is the beginning of a friendship."
"I'll drink to that," she replied with a grin, "though perhaps not tonight."
They all laughed, the sound scaring the herbivores around as the 6 new friends disappeared into the Neuter night.